I'm really excited to be teaching Linguistics 219 in 2018. I've been studying language acquisition since I was an undergraduate. I got really excited about the idea that language acquisition in children and in adults could tell us something about the human mind. And basically that's carried me through 35 years of working in language acquisition. In that time, my own PhD was on early language acquisition and mother-infant interaction and the transition from early gestural communication into linguistic communication. At that time, I grew up in England, and that was where I got my PhD. And then I went to the United States, and I did a whole bunch of work in bilingual language acquisition, working on the Navajo reservation for a number of years, and that was fascinating as well. At the same time, I was teaching language acquisition, first language acquisition and second language acquisition for people training to be language teachers. And then I had a stint of being a language teacher myself. I was in France for 5 years and both taught English as a foreign language and also did research in second language acquisition. Then I came to New Zealand in 2000 and found myself actually working on language disorder. And so I've now been part for a number of years of helping to train speech and language therapists at the University of Canterbury and doing research in language disorder myself. So one of the things that I want to be able to do in Linguistics 219 is bring a linguist's perspective to language acquisition, both first and second language acquisition. And so I'm really looking forward to teaching it again. I used to teach it, but after the earthquakes, it had to take a back seat. And so I'm really happy that I'm able to teach it again. I think language acquisition, understanding things about language acquisition, understanding the path of language acquisition in children and also in adults allows us to tackle some pretty big issues. I suppose one of the biggest is why is it only humans that have language of this kind? And I don't think we have answered that question to our satisfaction at all. And one of the issues is that people sort of define the problem or define the solution, really allows a solution to define the problem is what I'm trying to say. So when people think that language is relatively simple, they can come up with fairly simple solutions to how children learn language, for example. But when they really understand how complex language is, then that actually changes things, because now you've got to have a much more complex solution to the problem of how languages are learned. Why should we care? Well, if you want to understand why as a child you found it pretty easy to learn your first, second or third languages as a child, assuming that you are multilingual, why is it more difficult, particularly if you were monolingual actually, why is it more difficult to learn another language later in life? Same brain, same person, why is it more difficult to learn a second language later in life? Another reason is many people actually many parents worry about their children's language development. And that isn't helped by people who assume that language development in children is pretty homogeneous. It isn't. It's quite heterogeneous actually, and there's a lot of variability in the way each child actually acquires their first language or languages. And unless we understand that variability, we're not actually able to give really good advice to parents. And that is really important, particularly if you think you might later on want to be a clinician, you want to go into speech and language therapy, or even if you're a teacher. Very recently, the Education Review Office did a review of what early childhood teachers know about oral language development, and they were really concerned to discover the answer was very little. So if you're an early childhood teacher or you're thinking about becoming one, having a really solid grounding in language acquisition is really, really important, because of all the things that, for example, predict academic success and competence in reading, for example, oral language is right up there, because children who have strong oral language abilities end up having strong literacy abilities. So understanding those connections and understanding what and how children learn language in early childhood can really give you an edge as an early childhood teacher. If you're thinking about going into second language acquisition, into teaching English as a foreign language, or teaching any other language as a foreign language, knowing a bit about second language acquisition can be really helpful, because there are things that you can manipulate in the classroom that will improve the chances of your students learning more effectively, learning more quickly, and we know quite a lot about how to manipulate even quite formal language teaching situations like a classroom to improve the outcomes for second language learners.